The email arrived at 7:14 p.m., a thin slice of digital annoyance in an otherwise peaceful Thursday. It was from Fortress Storage, and the subject line, in a cheerful, almost mocking font, read, "Action required, upcoming pest control maintenance." I groaned, letting my head fall back against the couch. According to the message, my unit, E47, along with the rest of the E-aisle, was scheduled for a mandatory spraying this Friday. All tenants were required to move their belongings at least 3 feet away from every wall to allow for access. The email was signed off with a preposterously upbeat, "Thanks for your cooperation. Have a secure day." My cooperation felt anything but voluntary. Unit E47 wasn't just a storage space. It was a 10 by 20-foot museum of my own indecision, a monument to a life I had recently dismantled. After the breakup with Mark, I had downsized from a 2-bedroom house to a 1-bedroom apartment with comical speed. I wasn't ready to let go of the shared furniture, the life we had built, so I'd entombed it here. It held the oversized armchair I couldn't part with, boxes of books I swore I'd reread, the disassembled frame of a guest bed for a guest room I didn't have, and the entire contents of my parents' attic, which I'd inherited after they downsized. It was a dense, 3-dimensional jigsaw puzzle of my life's baggage. Clearing a 3-foot perimeter was not a trivial task. It was an archaeological dig through my own recent history. The facility's gate closed at 10 p.m. I checked my watch, 8:22 p.m. A familiar wave of procrastination-induced anxiety washed over me. If I didn't do it tonight, I'd have to take time off work tomorrow. With a sigh of resignation, I pulled on a pair of old work boots, grabbed a set of leather gloves from the hook in the garage, and headed out into the chilly October night.
Fortress Storage was located on the frayed edge of town, where suburbia gave way to warehouses and lonely stretches of undeveloped land. The drive itself was part of the ritual of descent. I left the warm, familiar grid of residential streets and turned onto a poorly lit industrial boulevard. The streetlights here were older, casting a sickly, sodium orange glow on the cracked asphalt. I passed a shuttered lumber yard, a trucking depot where sleeping rigs sat silent in the darkness, and finally, the turnoff for the storage facility. The entrance was marked by a large, imposing sign with a cartoonish castle turret, a promise of security that, at night, felt more like a warning. The F in Fortress flickered erratically, as if the sign itself was having a seizure. I punched in my code, and the heavy iron gate slid open with a low, mournful groan. My headlights swept across the sprawling grid of identical rust-red garage doors. The aisles were labeled with stark white letters, A, B, C, D. It was a cold, impersonal geography, a necropolis for discarded things. I navigated the turns slowly, my tires crunching on loose gravel. By the time I reached aisle E, my car was the only vehicle in sight. I parked in front of Unit 47, and the moment I cut the engine, a profound and unnerving silence descended. It wasn't the gentle quiet of the countryside. It was a dead, flat, industrial silence, the kind that makes the sound of your own heartbeat feel like a drum. The air was cold and still, carrying the faint metallic scent of impending rain and the chemical tang of weed killer from the gravel verges.
I got out and approached the roll-up door, the painted numbers 47 seeming to stare back at me in the gloom. The lock was cold and stiff in my hand. With a grunt of effort, I slid the heavy door upward, its screeching protest echoing down the deserted concrete canyon of the aisle. The single, bare bulb inside flickered to life, a weak beacon in the oppressive dark. It cast long, distorted shadows over the familiar landscape of my clutter. Stacks of brown boxes, furniture shrouded in white sheets like slumbering giants, a bicycle missing a wheel. The air inside was thick with the scent of time itself, of dust, aging paper, and the faint, cloying sweetness of the pest control chemicals they'd already used in other sections. I pulled out my phone, put on a familiar podcast, and turned up the volume. The cheerful, mindless chatter of the hosts was a welcome shield, a small bubble of normalcy in the vast, creepy silence. For the first hour, the world was reduced to the 4 walls of my unit and the voices in my ears. I was just a woman, alone, wrestling with her own history, one box at a time.
I was an hour and a half in, sweating despite the chill, when my podcast was interrupted by a low battery warning. I pulled my phone from my pocket to dismiss it and decided to take a break. I took off my headphones, and the silence that rushed back in was startling. It felt deeper this time, heavier, as if it had been waiting patiently for my attention. And that's when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong. It was faint, rhythmic tapping, seeming to come from somewhere far down the aisle, toward the back of the facility.
Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. It wasn't random. It had a cadence, a deliberate quality that made the hairs on my arms stand up. It sounded almost like a clumsy attempt at Morse code. I stood completely still, listening. It stopped. I told myself it was water dripping from a leaky gutter, or maybe the wind rattling a loose piece of siding, but the rhythm had felt too intentional. I walked to the edge of my unit and peered cautiously down the long, shadowy corridor of aisle E. It was empty. The rows of red doors stretched into the gloom, punctuated by the weak pools of light from the overhead lamps. I took a few steps out into the aisle, my boots making soft sounds on the asphalt. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and thin. No answer, just the low hum of a distant transformer. As I listened, the tapping started again, but it was gone as quickly as it came, a brief 3-tap burst. It was playing with me. I returned to my unit, the feeling of unease now a solid knot in my stomach. Just another tenant, I told myself. A weird one, maybe. Someone working on a strange hobby. But the sound was so isolated, so stark against the utter stillness. I went back to work, but I left my headphones off. Every scrape of a box, every scuff of my boots on the concrete felt like a broadcast of my exact position. Just as I was trying to shove a heavy box labeled kitchen, I heard another sound. The distinct metallic screech of a roll-up door, followed by a soft rumble as it closed. It was nearby. I froze, listening. Had someone just arrived? Or had they been here the whole time?
20 minutes later, my back aching, I took another break. I leaned against the cold, corrugated metal of the door frame, sipping from a water bottle and surveying my progress. And then, I saw him. He was about 4 units down, on the opposite side of the aisle. A man. He was standing in the open doorway of his unit, the one I'd just heard close. But he wasn't doing anything. His back was to me, and he was staring into the black void of his storage space. And it was utterly empty. I could see the bare concrete floor and the gray corrugated metal walls from where I stood. There was nothing inside. Nothing at all. He was unnervingly still, a silent silhouette against the darkness of the empty unit. He was wearing a plain gray hoodie, the hood pulled up, and dark jeans. It was the kind of anonymous outfit that made you invisible, forgettable. I watched him, my mind racing, trying to categorize him. Security? No, they drove little carts and wore uniforms. A new tenant? Then where was his stuff? A homeless person seeking shelter? Maybe, but he seemed too clean, too still. I felt a primal urge to call out, to break the strange, silent tableau with a simple hello, but the word died in my throat. I felt like a naturalist who had stumbled upon a predator in its unnatural habitat. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I should not announce my presence. I slowly, quietly, retreated into the relative safety of my own unit, using the stacks of boxes as a screen.
My mission to clear the walls was officially over. A new, more urgent mission had taken its place. Get out. Now. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, uneven drumbeat. I fumbled to consolidate the mess I'd made, my movements hurried and clumsy. I wanted to call someone, to hear a friendly voice, to tether myself to the normal world. I pulled out my phone. Full bars. I tapped Mark's name before I could think about it, a reflex. The phone screen read calling for a few seconds, then switched to call failed. I tried again. Call failed. I opened my browser. No internet connection. It was impossible. I'd been streaming a podcast just minutes ago. A new kind of fear, cold and technological, began to creep in. I felt utterly, completely cut off. I decided to risk a peek. I crept to the edge of the doorway and peered out. He was gone. The open, empty unit 4 doors down was now closed and locked.
For a dizzying second, I felt a wave of relief. Maybe he was just a weird guy, and now he had left. Maybe the phone thing was a fluke. I took a deep breath, grabbed my jacket and water bottle, and stepped out, ready to pull down my door. And he was there. Not gone, just moved. He was standing in the middle of the aisle, halfway between his unit and mine. He was facing me. He was about 50 feet away, but his presence felt immense, sucking all the air out of the space between us. His face was still mostly obscured by the shadow of his hood, but I could see he was holding something, a small, unlit cigarette. As if he had been waiting for me to emerge, he brought it to his lips. He flicked a lighter, the brief, intense flare illuminating a shockingly pale, gaunt face. His eyes were dark, sunken, and they were fixed directly on me.
He took a long, theatrical drag from the cigarette. He didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge me in any human way. He just stared. I felt pinned by his gaze, a butterfly on a corkboard. My hand was gripping the handle of my roll-up door so tightly my knuckles were white. I knew I had to do something. I gave him a tight, forced smile and a small, jerky nod, the universal gesture of, "I see you. I am not a threat. Please let our interaction end here." He didn't return the gesture. Instead, he did something that made my blood turn to ice. He mimicked me. He performed a slow, deliberate nod, a perfect, robotic echo of my own nervous movement. But his was devoid of any emotion. It was calm, clinical, analytical. It was mockery. A moment later, I unconsciously brushed a strand of hair from my face. He raised his own hand and mirrored the gesture perfectly, his fingers tracing the air where the hair would be. I felt a wave of nausea. I yawned, a nervous, jaw-popping yawn. His mouth opened in a silent, identical yawn. It was a game. He was showing me that he saw everything, every tiny, unconscious signal of my fear. This was a performance, a terrifying, silent game of psychological warfare. I slammed my roll-up door down. The crash was a deafening boom that ripped through the silence. I didn't wait to hear his reaction. I turned and walked, as fast as I could without breaking into a full sprint, towards my car. My keys were clutched in my fist. I could hear his footsteps behind me, soft and measured on the asphalt. They weren't rushed. They were perfectly in sync with my own. When I sped up, he sped up. When I slowed slightly to navigate around a puddle, he slowed too. It was a horrifying, synchronized dance. I didn't dare look back. I just kept walking, my car a distant sanctuary in the oppressive darkness.
Running felt like a capitulation, an admission of fear that he would feast on. So I walked. Each step was a thunderclap in my ears. The sound of his mirroring footsteps was a form of torture. The facility was a grid, the aisles separated by high chain-link fences topped with rusted barbed wire. There were no shortcuts. The only way out was to follow the path. My car was parked just past the corner of aisle E, maybe 100 feet away. It felt like a mile. I rounded the corner, fumbling in my pocket for my keys. My fingers felt like clumsy, frozen sausages. I finally wrapped my hand around the familiar, cool metal. But as I looked up, my heart seized. He was there, in front of me. He was standing at the intersection of aisle E and the main thoroughfare, blocking my path to the car. It was impossible. He had been behind me. I hadn't heard him run past me. He would have had to scale 2 fences in complete silence to beat me here. Yet there he was, standing under one of the flickering orange lights, his hands in the pockets of his gray hoodie. He was looking at me, his head tilted with that same inquisitive, inhuman curiosity. I stopped dead. We were in a standoff. I could scream, but who would hear? My mind was a whirlwind of panic. He took a slow step towards me, then another. He stopped about 15 feet away. "You seem to be in a hurry," he said. His voice was flat, monotone, devoid of any inflection. It was the most terrifying voice I had ever heard. "It's late," I stammered, my own voice a pathetic, shaky whisper. "It is," he agreed. He took another step. "You dropped this." He held out his hand. It was empty. I stared at his open palm, then back at his shadowed face. I didn't drop anything," I said. He kept his hand extended. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice unchanged. He took another step. "Everyone drops something. It's important not to lose things. The question hung in the air, loaded with a meaning I couldn't grasp but felt in my bones. It was another test, a move in his twisted game.
That's when I broke. I screamed a raw, primal sound of pure terror, and I ran. I didn't run away from him, I ran at him, swerving to the side at the last second. My shoulder brushed against him as I passed. He felt unnaturally solid and cold, like a statue. I didn't look back. I sprinted the final 50 feet to my car, my lungs burning. I jammed the key into the lock, the sound of it clicking open a flare of hope in the darkness. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and mashed the lock button. Through the windshield, I saw him. He hadn't moved. He was still standing in the same spot, watching me, his hands still extended. I jammed the key into the ignition, my hands shaking violently. The engine roared to life. I slammed the car into reverse, not caring what was behind me. The drive from my spot to the front gate would take at least 30 seconds, navigating the tight corners of the aisles. I glanced in my rearview mirror for a split second to make sure the way was clear. He was still there, a stationary figure in the orange gloom. I looked forward again, whipped the wheel to the side, and stomped on the gas. I careened down the main artery of the facility, past the silent rows of doors. As I rounded the final turn towards the exit, my headlights hit the gate, and my heart stopped. Standing by the exit gate's keypad, bathed in the white glare of my high beams, was the man in the gray hoodie. It was impossible. It was a physical, logical, soul-shattering impossibility. He was just there. He turned his head slowly, and in the full glare of my lights, he smiled. A wide, predatory smile. Then he raised his hand and gave a slow, deliberate wave. I didn't even process the gate being open. My foot was welded to the accelerator. The car shot through the gap, tires squealing on the asphalt as I swerved onto the main road, away from that place, away from that impossible smile. I drove for miles, my hands locked on the steering wheel in a death grip, my breath coming in ragged, painful sobs. I kept checking the rearview mirror, my eyes darting back and forth between the dark road ahead and the terrifying emptiness behind me. There were no headlights. He wasn't following. The encounter was over, but the terror was just beginning. It had burrowed inside me, a parasite of pure dread. The human mind has fail-safes. It erects walls of logic to protect itself from the incomprehensible. My mind was desperately trying to build those walls, to find an explanation. Twins? A ridiculously elaborate prank? But the calm, the mimicry, the impossible teleportation, it all crumbled the foundations of reality. It wasn't a man. It was a tear in the fabric of things. When I finally stumbled into my house, I locked the door and slid the deadbolt, then leaned against it, shaking. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, every light in the house on, jumping at every creak and groan of the pipes. The next morning, fueled by a sleepless night and a desperate need for validation, I called Fortress Storage. I spoke to the manager, a brisk-sounding woman named Brenda. I told her everything: the man, the empty unit, the tapping, the mimicry, the impossible appearance at the gate. I could hear her typing as I spoke, the clicks loud and impatient. "Ma'am," she said, her voice dripping with practiced skepticism, "I've just reviewed the gate logs and the entry keypad data from last night. The system shows your code was used to enter at 8:26 p.m. and to exit at 10:13 p.m. There were no other codes entered or used during that time. You were the only person on the property." "That's not possible," I insisted, my voice rising with hysteria. "He was there. I saw him. Check your cameras for the aisles." There was another sigh, the sound of a woman who had dealt with countless strange stories. "As I believe I mentioned in the email, we had a technician servicing the DVR for aisles D through G last night. The cameras in that section were offline for routine maintenance. However, the gate cameras were fully operational. I'm looking at the footage of your exit now. The gate opens, your car drives through. There's no one else there. The area around the keypad is empty. Frankly, Miss Jensen, we don't appreciate these kinds of stories. It can make our other tenants nervous." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I was alone in the footage. She was dismissing me, even subtly blaming me. I hung up, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. That night, I fell down a rabbit hole of internet forums and fringe websites. I searched for terms like Glare Man, the Mimic, and Storage Unit Encounter. I found a forum called The Glitch Board. One post, dated 3 years prior, stood out. It read, "He doesn't talk at first. He just watches. He'll show you what you look like.
He'll show you he knows you're scared. He's not there to hurt you. He's there to see what you do. Don't play the game. Just leave. Don't ever go back.
I never went back to Fortress Storage. I hired a moving company, telling them the code and the unit number over the phone. I couldn't bring myself to even go near that part of town again. The official story is that I was a woman, alone at night, who let her imagination get the better of her. But I know what I saw. I had an encounter with something that operates by a different set of rules, something that walks in the seams of our world. It's a knowledge that has permanently rewired my brain. The world doesn't feel solid anymore. It feels thin, like a stage backdrop that could tear at any moment. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I'll see a stranger on the street, and for a split second, their posture, their walk, will seem unnervingly familiar, and I feel that same cold dread, because I know that they are out there, watching and waiting for the next experiment to begin.